But yeah, welcome to this exchange session about talking openly about organisational endings. We've got Iona from the Decelerator with us, and also Claire and Peter from Skimstone Arts, and the sun is shining on all of us, so we're all very happy about that. So I'm Phoebe from Youth Music. I have pale skin, freckles, and I'm in my office room, and I'm wearing a kind of beige jumper. And yeah, I'm basically going to hand over to Carol for a little bit of context, and then we'll go over to Iona.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. I'm Carol, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Programme Director at Youth Music, where I'm responsible for all of our grant making work, and also currently the interim co-CEO while we recruit our permanent CEO. We think this is a really important session to be hosting today. I was sort of reflecting as I was walking into work today and thinking about the session and I suppose reflecting on my experience in this sector of sort of 25 years. And one of the things that I think we're really bad at is saying no. And I think one of the consequences for that is that often we're not great at planning for endings. Yet we're in a time of funding crisis. You'll probably have heard the stats that we came out with last year from a survey that we'd done, where 41% of the organisations that we surveyed were at risk of closure. So we know that we're in hard times, and if you're leading in a time of crisis, it can be a lonely place. What we try and do through this exchange series is really just bring people together, and we want people to feel like they're part of a wider community and to get support from that wider community. So we're delighted today to be working with Iona from Decelerator and Claire and Peter from Skimstone Arts, who we funded since, I think it was 2013. So we've got quite a long-standing funding relationship with them. Speaking to this thing of being in hard times as well, endings can feel quite daunting, and often they've got quite a negative association attached to them. We wanted to really take the opportunity to explore that a little bit and to maybe flip some of that narrative today, and provide some really practical sort of advice and support and signposting. I just want to acknowledge that potentially you might feel a little bit weird being in the room with a funder and having this conversation. I just want to reassure you that probably if there's stuff coming up today, it's certainly nothing that we haven't heard before. And hopefully you'll hear, from Claire and Peter, we're here to support you. And yeah, so just big up really for being here today and having these conversations. That is enough from me. Let's now pass over to people who know a lot more about endings than I do. And Iona.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. My name is Iona. My pronouns are she, her, and I have got slightly damp hair because I'm not currently at my house. I'm at my sister's house because I'm visiting her, and I don't have a hairdryer. I'm wearing a kind of, I don't even know, slightly stripy top. I used to have ginger hair, but then I got older and it disappeared. And I sometimes wish I had ginger hair still because I think it would be cooler than this mousy brown stuff. I spend my days and my weeks running a small, non-for-profit organisation called the Deceleration. And my background is I used to work I've always worked in the charity sector, and I ran the foundation for Jo Cox, the MP who was killed in 2016 because she was a friend of mine. And one of the things we did for her was a lot of work on loneliness and social isolation. I anticipate that's something that feeds into all of your work. And through the COVID period, I was looking for a new job. And to be very crude and explicit about it, everything I thought I wanted to do started closing in the middle of a loneliness crisis. And I found myself asking, what's going on here? Why at a time where there's such abundant need for work that is about building stronger connections and relationships, is the civil society that we have created to do that work and to support that work in communities, why is it crumbling now? That seems a bit counterintuitive. And so I started doing a bit of research for Paul Hamlin Foundation on charity closures, and that gradually evolved into what it is now, which is a a specific, free at the point of use, confidential support service for organisations who are encountering or anticipating or delivering some form of organisational ending. And today, we're going to bring all of that expertise that we've been building to help you take a moment to reflect on what organisational endings are, why they matter, and how they can be better and worse. We're going to take a look at this kind of particular moment in time and taking into account specifically the arts and culture sector and what we're seeing about what the real challenges are in this time. Not to present you with a whole bunch of stuff you already know, because you do know it, and we're going to hear from Claire and Peter their experience of it as well, but more to hopefully provide you with some reassurance and steadiness. Hopefully you'll hear some things that perhaps aren't spoken about so often, as a way of you realizing that it's not necessarily just on you that you're finding certain aspects of organizational leadership challenging, or you're asking bigger questions. And third of all, we're going to leave you with absolutely no shadow of a doubt that you are not alone in this. As I say, all of our work at the Decelerator is free at the point of use and confidential. And I just want to commend Youth Music for hosting this session, because it's not an easy thing for funders to proposition their grantees with these questions, because obviously there are questions of power in there. And then everyone who's turned up, frankly, hats off to you, because oftentimes we've run these sorts of sessions and for very understandable reasons people just don't want to come. And as you'll find out from us, attending this session is actually what we think is really profoundly important leadership credentials, rather than a kind of acknowledgement that it's curtains for a program or a part of your organization. And so I just want to acknowledge that you're all, taking time out of your busy days to look at something that perhaps, depending on your background and what your professional experience has been so far, you've been taught basically to look the other way from. So when we talk about organisational endings at the Decelerator, we're talking about all sorts of things that happen over the course or the journey of an organisation when something comes to an end. So it might be program endings or the end of a project. It might be whole organisational closures or wind downs. It might be mergers. It could be a significant restructure. It could be about leadership succession and in the exit of an old leader and the start of a new one. And it can be kind of short term, or last minute crisis driven sort of insolvencies and liquidations. And as you'll hear from us, the organisational endings are both about what's happening in individual organisations and what might be coming to an end. But what we do at the Decelerator is we're also looking at the bigger picture and trying to work out what's ending at a more structural or sectoral level. And as you'll hear from us, and it probably won't be news to you, it's not totally random what is ending. There are kind of particular patterns that help fortify our ability collectively as civil society to navigate through this time. The good news is that not all endings have to be a disaster. In our experience, and we've been doing this work for 6 years now, and we've worked with around 500 organisations. And across all of those, we see in so many different ways that better endings are those that kind of centre on the mission or the purpose of an organisation, not on its current scale or size. I'm just going to make sure that these messages are perfect. I was just checking those messages weren't I can't hear you, I can't see you. They are careful and respectful for everyone involved, most importantly perhaps for beneficiaries, but also staff, trustees, volunteers and the wider sector. Endings that are better are those that kind of seed a legacy, and that legacy is really intentional. And I think we're going to hear lots of that from Claire and Peter. And part of that is about celebrating what's come before, and part of that is about sowing the seeds for what comes next. And ultimately, we think that endings done well can catalyse sector renewal. They can create the civil society of the future rather than just purely diminish the civil society that we have right now. There are bad endings, and I'm sure you're all familiar with those. These have the hallmarks of being often unresourced or under-resourced, which is why it's great. We're going to hear from Carol later about their commitment to flexible funding and thinking about how endings can be in some way financially supported. They're often rooted in quite a lot of shame and harm, and this is for very understandable reasons. You'll hear more about what we hear on the hotline that we run. But most people just hope that this never happens on their watch, whatever it might be, a contraction, a closure, just like put their fingers in their ears and hope it doesn't happen. And that's for very understandable reasons, but it doesn't necessarily create the kind of better, impactful, legacyful endings that we think are a useful part of civil society life. Impact that's come previously is undermined, and I'd have to say, like, the endings that I was part of and saw in the loneliness sector, for example, through COVID, really undermined what had come before, because they were very crisis driven and they were unplanned, and it meant that, like, in some ways people have, like, discounted really important work and just been like, oh, well, it wasn't sustainable, or it didn't work, or those trustees didn't have their stuff together, so really it means that the whole work wasn't really helpful. And at a sectoral level, I think we've really seen a diminishment of that sector at a time where I think we needed to see an expansion and a deepening of it. And ultimately, there's no discernible legacy, or if there is a legacy, as I say, people kind of, it's one of kind of discrediting what came before rather than genuinely learning, celebrating what was good and acknowledging what was no longer working. And I have an amazing small team of people who are extremely experienced. We've got Linda and she's coming up to her 70th birthday, and she's an interim voluntary sector leader. We've got Michael, who's run everything from local infrastructure groups to community organising organisations to a funder. We've got Haranya, who's a finance professional. Those are just a few of the people that we work with. And they pick up the phone every single day to brilliant, courageous leaders who are asking themselves really important questions about their organisation. And 100% of people who call us want to talk in part about the financial and funding context, and that won't be a surprise to you. I assume in the kind of 41% figure that Carol quoted at the beginning of organisations who are considering closure, a lot of what is going on there is about kind of finances. And I guess what's surprising perhaps to people is that 70% of calls that talk about financial distress go on to talk about conflict and governance challenges. And this isn't intended to say, like, oh gosh, trustees, they just, pull their finger out and be a bit more collegiate, or start, like, it's not said with any kind of attribution of blame. But I think for us, this is a signal that this is a sector under extreme stress, where there are no easy answers for very difficult questions. And that creates conflict. And I think if you throw into the mix that many of us, like we are today, are spending time together online, not in person, board meetings often, as well as staff kind of relationships are conducted a lot more online than they once were. And that's creating a kind of shift in the way we relate to each other. And I think that is inevitably causing some conflict that can get really debilitating. An organisation that might have a kind of 3-month time horizon and in which they have to take difficult decisions might be gripped by a staff conflict or trustees who refuse to be on the same call as each other, which, whilst understandable, if we're interested in what can civil society do now to protect and endure the things that are most valuable, then we have to get better at acknowledging and managing conflict, as well as managing the really difficult funding environment and the financial context. And so people are telling us that there are many drivers that are pulling them towards questions around endings. And these include, as I said, financial distress, but it's also about business model collapse. So it's not just like our funders have stopped funding us. It's like we used to understand that we could balance 40% of local authority income, 20% of community giving, and the rest of it would be philanthropy. Now they're like, all of that has changed and we can't rebuild our business model fast enough to keep up with what we need, the show that needs to be kept on the road. And all of this is causing a lot of burnout and distress. I think we see leaders exhausted, not just from the slog of it all, but also from the feeling that the responsibility for jobs, for impact, for beneficiaries is basically on their shoulders. They feel very isolated and alone. And we think that that's much more important than a question of pure burnout, where it's oh, have you tried co-leadership? It's co-leadership can't solve some of these wider structural challenges. And so whilst it's really important part of what a good organisational leadership structure might look like, it's not going to solve the wider challenge. We're also seeing, as I said, governance breakdowns where the burden on unpaid trustees, the burden on different levels of the organisation is really very strenuous. And we're also seeing the costs of organisational drift. Like organisations, I was speaking to an arts organisation the other day, for example, they've been running for 30 years, very profound, high quality reputation, and they're talking about pivoting into a well-being hub because they think that's where the opportunities are in their funding environment. And I'm not here to say whether or not that's right or wrong, but I'm sure that you're all familiar with the challenge of like pursuing funding alongside pursuing your organization's mission, and how you can find yourself sort of drifting away from where you thought you might have been at a point where you're trying to take bigger existential like sort of decisions about the organization's future. And of course there's conflict, as I've already said. If we look at the arts and culture sector specifically, there's a real challenge here. And like you guys are, if you count yourself as arts and culture organisations, that's my assumption. But if you don't, I'm sorry for like representing you. We see there's like very specific challenges in that sector. There's like a high degree of project funding that traps organisations into like short-term decision making and crisis-fueled endings. We're seeing like fundamental business model challenges. Like I'm sure you're probably familiar with like the state of local authority funding for the arts. And like if there's anywhere that's been cut first, arguably it's often the kind of arts and culture sector. You're obviously very often reliant on rising venue and delivery costs because so much of the work can be in person. And they're very specifically organisational drift and leadership distress in the sector that represent all of those things. And people assume that people come to us wanting to talk about having reached the point of no return and having to take a decision very quickly about a sort of crisis-fueled or like survival at all costs ending where you've got no options left. And reassuringly, over the 6 years that I've done this work, when I first started being like, anyone thinking about endings, you can call me, I can help, maybe, people started by calling us from the point of insolvency. And we'll talk more about the kind of survival at all costs instinct that grips us all, myself included. But I think hearteningly, we've been at this work for 6 years and we're seeing that 62% of people are calling us with a planned ending in mind. And so that's somewhere between 3 and 6 months, depending on the kind of organisation you run. And it can be as much as like 1, 2 or 3 years away because you might have secured some new lottery funding and you're asking yourself whether or not you might be able to outlast this current funding cycle, or if you might want to plan for some form of ending because you don't think you're going to be able to replace that funding at the end of it. So planned endings take up the vast majority of our work right now. And underneath that, people call a lot with leadership succession planning questions. And that's particularly in like small to medium-sized organizations. I mean, I should also say that's the majority of the organizations that call us sit in the kind of small charity definition. So volunteer-led sometimes. If you've got staff, it's a handful of staff. You definitely don't turn over more than £1 million a year. You've got a board of trustees, but you don't have multiple layers of governance with finance committees and things. And we think that leadership succession in those contexts is particularly like precarious because often the kind of main lead funding staff member is also the chief exec, who's also the delivery lead. And we're going to hear a lot about Claire and Peter's experience of that. But like it's a real moment of kind of potential opportunity and also jeopardy for organisations. 16% of people are calling us about projects closing, and then you'll see emergency closure and insolvency. There's very little that discerns those, but insolvency is where you can no longer pay any of your bills and you have to call an insolvency practitioner. Emergency closure is where you're doing it probably in like a matter of weeks or just a month or two, and you just about manage to do it solvently, but you're not really attending to legacy or to care or to communicating your impact, that kind of thing. And people are also calling with mergers. And I kind of enjoy that 14% of people are saying, I don't know, I just need space to think. I just need someone to press pause for 50 minutes and help me work out what on earth my options might be and how concerned I might need to be. People call us with a bunch of these a lot of the time. So this, like in here, there are people who call us about leadership succession planning and planned closure because they're wondering whether or not their departure from the organisation precipitates a closure or whether there are other options available to them. And merger often sits alongside other options as well as an example of that. So I've already talked about that, and also that, I guess, like, just to be very explicit, like the Decelerator thinks that the risks to civil society. The Charity Commission is talking about over 50% of charities spending more than they earn currently, and we know where that money is coming from. Oftentimes it's coming from like reserves, and once you've eroded your reserves, I don't need to tell you that you end up kind of much more likely to like not have enough money in the system to be able to close or contract solvently if you need to. And we are here for everyone. Every call we get, we meet people with compassion and understanding and a commitment to believing whatever they do next, they can achieve better and worse outcomes. But once you've reached insolvency or emergency wind down stage, there's relatively little agency and control you can find over the quality of your ending. And so I hope that in time, we've got funding for the next 5 years to 2030, we might be able to see a contraction of this number, because we really think that this doesn't serve the needs of communities or society when we end up in insolvency. And I think it might be reassuring for you to hear how other people are feeling when they call us. So a lot of people see routinely that endings are something they perceive as failure or giving up or letting people down. And if I had £1 for every time someone said, I really just don't want this to happen on my watch, then I would be a rich person. And this is very normal. Like, I imagine there are all sorts of different ways in which you might see this coming up, but like, we're not very good at talking about endings full stop, let alone the endings of charities that we pour all of our hope and our life and our energy into. And so the idea that we might let them go or like lay them down is in some way like very counterintuitive. We also see, therefore, this kind of slightly fuels a kind of survival at all costs and last minute kind of approach to endings. So many people say when they hear about the decelerator's existence, oh, it's good to know they exist, but I've got a few more options to explore before I call them. I'll call them once I've run out of options. And we can always support you, whatever situation you find yourself in. But I'm sure, given that you're on this call, you're probably familiar with the idea that the longer you leave it, the fewer options you have. And we are trying to get people to put questions on the table early enough that they can have choice and options. It can be really hard to know where or when to begin with this stuff. People often say, when's the right time to put an ending on the table, and how long do I need for a good ending? As I say, like, it completely depends on the scale and the size of your organization, but like, sooner than you feel comfortable to do so is when you should be putting them on the table, if not from the very beginning in an ideal world. And second of all, how long do you need is really a matter of like, how long will it take to not just turn off the lights and let go of your staff in a way that takes as good care as possible of them, but also what might it look like to actively seed a legacy, to transfer assets, to communicate the lessons you've learned, even if this wasn't the place that you wanted to end up, but you think that there's really valuable like learnings for the sector at this very difficult, turbulent and uncertain moment. People assume that once you've put endings on the table, they become inevitable. And if you take one thing away from this whole spiel, I would love it to be this: 50% of people who call us about closure go on to close within 12 months, and 50% of people don't. That means that like putting these questions on the table doesn't precipitate this kind of emergency disaster zone. It just creates a sense of what we hear time and again in our feedback, that people are like, oh, that was less bad than I anticipated, and I feel more confident about my options going forward. And that's why 100% of people, who even those who've closed, would recommend us to a friend. This is a silly thing that's designed a bit to like help us recognize that like everything I've said is like in all of us. So like when I talk about survival at all costs, I'm not sitting here being like, the Decelerator's sorted this out. Like, we're just comfortable with all sorts of endings, and it's the sector that needs to catch up. Like, all of us show up in questions of endings for very different reasons, very understandable reasons in different ways. And after this call, we'll circulate a little exercise sheet that you might find useful. But it's kind of prompted to help reassure you if you're dealing with endings and you've got in yourself or in people around you some kind of challenging behaviors or dynamics at play. That like we're all just like often acting in auto like mode or autopilot. And so some of us approach a question of endings just being like specific, like very decidedly hopeful. Like, we're not going to look at this because if we do, it will come and like kill us immediately. And then you've got people who are sitting on board meetings being the Eeyore, and they're like, we tried that, we can't do anything, and they suck the life out of things. You've got like the rescuer who, like, I definitely am a hardcore rescuer in the best of times, like someone who's like, if I just work hard enough, I will solve this problem. You've got like the blame shifter who wants to tell you how it's everyone else's fault but theirs, and they'll take up a whole 50 minutes talking about how it's the trustees and the funders' fault, and there's nothing for them to think about. And these are all sort of archetypes, and they're exaggerated. But as you might have, if you have experience of endings, you might remember a board meeting or a staff conversation where there are all sorts of these characters in the mix. And actually working well with endings is about acknowledging that these are all coming from a good place, but we need to go beyond our kind of existing ways of seeing endings if we're to work well in this time where there's a lot of turbulence and uncertainty in civil society. So all of that is very good on paper, but it doesn't really count for much. I mean, as I say, all of our work is rooted in like actual human experience, but there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth. That's very rude, Claire and Peter. You aren't horses. But like Claire and Peter are going to talk, I think, through what their experience of their very inspiring closure tells us about, what you've learned and what leadership looks like at this moment in time. So over to you, Claire and Peter.
There we go. Can you all see the slides okay? Yeah, great. It helps if I go back to the beginning of them, actually. That would be really good. Let me go back to the beginning. There we go. Hold on a second. Sorry, there we are. Too busy looking at them this morning. First of all, we would like to say a big thank you that we've been invited to share our story, and we very much respect those who've come today and all of those things that you may be feeling, and also the great context that's been laid before us from Youth Music and Deceleration. Can I just say that I'm a white woman with blonde hair with blue bits in, which my niece quite liked the blue bits. Whoops, a daisy. And we're in our studio at the moment. I have a keyboard to my right, which I'm going to try and practice more now that my positive endings come. And I have my co-colleague here, Peter, who will also describe himself when he comes to speak. So who are we? We'll talk about Skimstone Arts in the present, although we have actually closed, but we wanted to say this is who we are. We were established in 2007 and became a charity in 2019. So we went for quite a number of times as a company limited by guarantee with charitable aims. So our mission was to support diverse artists, people and communities at risk of socialisation that they didn't ask for. I'm always very clear about that. To create work with, for and about the world that matters to them. We, over the years, ended up looking very carefully at our model of delivery. And so we looked at the different funding strategies that we drew up, and we tailored it all into an annual programme. This annual programme enabled us to bring all the different communities that we work with often into one place. So rather than having young people over here, older people over here, live refugee over here, we brought them all together to actually share stories and then the artworks, mainly music, that was made. So I've gone silent, never mind. So our annual programme consisted of a Unity Festival, which grew out of lockdown. We had our very first one on screen, and it involved people from all over the world coming in because we all felt very isolated at the time. We also committed very much to National Holocaust Memorial Day, which we did on radio as well as a live event, and often in settings where people would find the event. All our events were always free, so they were accessible and in accessible venues. And we also committed to National Refugee Week. The communities that we work with come from all over the Northeast and also regionally. We again, through that annual programme, ended up meeting amazing communities that we wouldn't otherwise have done. So the Ukrainian community, Bosnian community, people from Sudan, Nigeria, as well as our local communities, often marginalised in sort of housing estates across the northeast. And of course, our young people were very much a part of that. And the young people came from all these different communities as well. We also work with, and still are, with our older people. They're not that much older than me, but it's a funny phrase. I prefer to say those in later years. We're still continuing to run band practice in the day centre there on a Friday morning. Our communities also involved academic communities as well with research projects. Our partnerships, you can see I've already outlined some of them there. And really through youth music, we were able to build partnerships with lots of different young people's organisations, some of which were music-based, some of which were community-based across the northeast. Our general aims were really, what was passionate for us was that we were creating a voice, visibility, and accessibility to being a recognised part of an arts and social sector landscape, to feel that whatever you were creating that responded to our themes of humanity and the environment was what you and us together were saying. And this meant that through these events, we felt there was an equality. And we wanted that equality of voice. That was the reason that we set up Skimstone Arts in the first place. When you come from quite a privileged background, you're very aware of the lack of privilege, the lack of visibility. And that was very important to us, was our own little humble way, if we could just equal out the playing field through those that we were privileged enough to be inspired by and work with. And our work was co-created together. So we often said a Skimstone project meant that people became part of Skimstone Arts. So moving on to the next question was really about how did we arrive at a decision to close? In 2023, I collapsed and was taken to hospital, and I was discovered I had a brain tumour. And that was a real shock, I can tell you, and very scary. And what happened was, over the months of dealing with it and knowing I had a big operation that I got through, but that there was a sense of a sort of, how much longer can I continue working at such a high level as a CEO manager, obviously running delivery as well, and pastoral care, and funding, doing all the funding applications and so on. And I felt it was a bit of a wake-up call that maybe I needed a bit of a different life, or life-work balance. And with Peter is my colleague, but he's also my husband. He does get a certificate at the end of each year for that, by the way, for coping with me, but coping with each other. But we had to really carefully consider what was going to be the future. We had been affected by the landscape that Iona was describing, and already had considered moving to cheaper premises. We were very lucky to be asked to come to this current premises, which halved our rent. We were still part funded for core and delivery through 3 funders, so it wasn't a funding decision. However, what it really meant was we weren't fully funded, and we hadn't got NPO in the 3rd round that we'd applied for NPO. Because Newcastle is saturated with NPOs, we were encouraged to maybe think about moving to Stockton and so on, but we had too many of our communities here. And so we had to make quite a difficult decision to decide it was better if we thought about, well, firstly, could we advertise my role? But the reality of that, which again is highlighted in Iona's talk, is would anybody apply for a role where you're CEO, artistic director, and you will be asked to do the governance with the trustees, to do the management, the fundraising, the delivery, the pastoral care, the general admin, the funding meetings, and you've got to raise the money for your own job? and 6 others, and the full annual programme, so up to 250,000 a year. We felt that people wouldn't apply for that. And we were worried that, in a way, as we'd seen with other organisations, sometimes people apply and then the organisational charity collapses. And out of respect for everybody we worked with, we had a conversation that we said, wouldn't we rather go out on a real high, on a real celebration? Peter, do you want to talk a little bit? Have I covered some of this, I think, haven't I? Yeah, sorry. Do you want to?
No, it's okay. Let's move on to the next.
Okay, sorry, because I know we're very short of time here. I've taken a little bit of Peter's there. So what did closing really involve? I think there's some important things that we need to be honest here. We had quite a different board of trustees 2 years ago when this came up, some of which had served for a number of years, but that we felt they were panicked by what had happened. And that's not good for us. We needed some solidity, some compassion. So with very respectful conversations, and during still delivering a full-on Unity Festival with Arts Council money and so on, we actually made the decision to replace our board gradually. And so the current board, some of which I say were due to step down, we encouraged them to do that and actually had sought through professional networks a new chair and a previous trustee who was very supportive, and new trustees to come alongside who knew the full story. And it was the best thing we ever did, because that trustee board were supportive, were considerate, were very effective at checking in with us, but also looking at strategic thinking, to look at documentation that will support us. They brought new skills and understanding. And I can't tell you what that meant to Peter and I, to know that we were really, really well supported and had nothing to hide. Peter had also was going to talk about sensing an ending document that we've just found out Iona produced, which was a big help for us. So I'm just going to say a little bit more, then I'm going to hand over to Peter about how the youth music projects worked within this. So we made a decision to celebrate. That's what we wanted to do. And we'll talk a bit more about this. We wanted to go out on a high that was about everybody else that we worked with. We felt over the conversations that we had with our artists, our young people, and there's crossovers there, our communities, our partnerships, our volunteers, we wanted to have that narrative of let's celebrate what we've made and what we've done together. And so we not only did a celebration event, we actually sought funding to commission a zine where we got together with members of our community, and everybody, it was 48 people who said that they would be part of it, shared their story with us of what had happened in their life being part of Skimstone Arts. And that for us has become a very strong legacy document. It's become a lifeblood of stories, I'd rather say. And also amongst that, we decided in true music style that we would create 3 albums. Over to you, Peter. There's the Reality Beats Young People's one.
Hi, everybody. My name's Peter. I have olive skin, which is due to the fact I'm half Estonian, a gift from my father. I have now grey hair due to my age. So I used to have brown hair. And I'm wearing just a black shirt. I'm the music leader, or the lead musician, rather, of Skimstone Arts. What that actually means is, it means leading on certain projects, most crucially the youth music project.
So I guess what this process did for us was to give us a certain focus, basically, in terms of the projects that we did have. So I, as the lead in the youth music project, we made a focus on going outwards for our final year, because we did plan this from a full year until closing. So we focused on going out and talking to other organisations and working with them. It was already part of the plan for the youth music project, but it gave us a real focus. So we went out to Jack Drum Arts in County Durham, who we had a partnership with for many years, and then some new partners in the region. Part of that was working with their young people to co-write new songs, which would then, they'd have the opportunity to come into a professional studio and record on the album, that one of which Claire showed you earlier. So that would be part of our legacy. Of course, then they would also be invited to the final celebration party, and one of the groups performed as well. Another part of the process of closing, of course, was to look at the things that we'd gathered in our 18 years and to look at those resources and passing them on to organisations who could use them. So to do this, we got together an asset register and looked at which organisations would benefit most from certain equipment that we had to pass on.
I'm going to come back in now.
So I'm coming back in now, and I think it felt a little bit like, again, finding the joy, if we can, in being able to sort of be a bit of a father and mother Christmas and take resources to communities that are actually, we've got a youth community here who've just got their first youth music project, and being able to give them resources where they're absolutely thrilled at being able to use them with children. That feels good. I think we're trying to look wherever we can at where we can find some joy in what's happening in terms of where that takes other people and other organisations as well. We also, I think it was very important to say that part of our celebration event was enabling us to, and we got a successful Arts Council grant for it as well. We had key conversations with other funders, like I was explaining about, the very helpful one with youth music, where when we started to tell our funders this is what was going to happen, it was very interesting how youth music and also our community foundation, Tyne and Wear, and Arts Council were very supportive. Very supportive. In fact, they said, we want to give you some resources, apply for them, that we can help you to celebrate. So we had 110,000 that we built in to this celebration event. So it meant that we could commission. It meant that all our bands could be visible and have time to rehearse and create good quality recordings at Blank Studio and launch the different resources that we've just described to you. And having everybody there, we had 251 people, which Carol came as well. That felt really, really beautiful. And everybody has got that memory now to take away with them. So we felt that was critical. Alongside that, we also put out newsletters. Peter and I recorded little videos to say that it was happening, but encouraged people to still feel that they could come along. And also, just to let people know that we are still here in this one studio. We've reduced 3 studios into one. I won't tell you how that's going, but we're nearly there. But so we've still got a base. But obviously we're funding ourselves now. But it just means that there is life beyond. I think that's something that we felt was really, really critical. And so the final bits that we do want to share. So I'm just going to go through very quickly. These were the commissions for our final event. There's our legacy zine that we talked about and why that mattered, having those stories. And people love that zine. Apparently, it's, we still put it out across the community. It still celebrates politically and socially why the arts matter, why it is that stories about people's changes in life matter. And I think it's also about why these positive endings are really, really important. So our sort of final headlines is talk to your funders, get good trustees that support the vision and also the delivery of the final. We took, if you like, 2 years almost, but I think particularly the last year. And that meant it wasn't rushed, or it wasn't, we built up a reserves that allowed us to have that 7 months of wind down but actually have a year to feel like we were having a respectful end. We had a trustee who put together a Gantt chart, which was so helpful, and we sort of ticked off the practical steps. So it was all done very strategically, very professionally, very respectfully, and I think that's very important. And then finally, what you do find is that when you do things properly, other people's worlds open up. We have one very special story that Peter's going to just briefly share about somebody who might not have done this had we kept going.
Just hear his voice.
So, yes, what Claire's referring to, I think, is the idea of celebrate your successes and the successes of the people. So, there's a young person we supported through Arts Award who's been with us for a number of years and went through his bronze, silver and gold Arts Award with us. And this person approached me a few months ago and said, "Do you think I should apply to university?" He said, "None of my family have ever been to university before." And of course I said, "Yes, of course you should apply. Definitely, you'll never know if you don't apply." So this particular young person now has 4 unconditional offers to go and study film at university, which, as somebody who works with people, that's something that I will take away with me, to know that, that young person has a feeling of success. We also have one of our young people who started to do work for us, youth work, and started another youth work part-time post in the building, who has just got a full-time contract for a year to do youth work in Sunderland.
And there are many other stories that we haven't got time to share with you. Our final bits are, I've got them here. We also have started Skimstonia meetup. So the Land of Skimstonia is there for anybody. So once a month, the last Friday of every month, we meet in the little community cafe round the corner. And through that, we've had people who are with live refugee experience who want to volunteer actually end up volunteering in that cafe, and their whole confidence level's gone up. The idea of that group is it will self-manage. I will step back. I don't need to organise it anymore, and it will have a life of its own as long as it needs to. And I think that's the thing, is how can we own our own journey? How can we have a sense of what we have just tried to do in the many years that we've been working and celebrate that, not feel the failure? I did go through that, feeling like this written off, decrepit woman who's had her top of her head taken off and all the rest of it. But I think I'm through that now, thinking, actually, no, there is still a sense of self-worth, and the honour of seeing other people flourish gives that. But I also respect so much others going through more difficult situations and still doing something about it. So for each of you there, treasure yourself, treasure what you've done, treasure each other. The life is so short. We are just here as we pass through. And, if we can find, but not diminish the emotional upheaval, I think it's very important to acknowledge it. But certainly our own healing journey has come through the fact that we made a decision to celebrate and have celebration things that will always be with us and that we can share and support the sector at the same time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire. It's very hard to follow that up. You've spoken so beautifully, you and Peter, so thank you for that. I think Carol is going to follow that up with a bit of a reflection on how they can help. Over to you, Carol.
Just the practical stuff, but can I just echo, thank you for the beautiful energy that you just brought to that, both of you. And I think we've got a real sense of what Skinstone is all about. And so thank you. That was lovely. I just wanted to mention briefly about our flexible funding policy, really just to say that it exists. So one of the things that I see quite a lot in the organisations that we fund is that a lot of funding and prioritization is going towards supporting children and young people, and sometimes at the expense of organizations and the people running those organizations. So if you're thinking about how you could maybe change some things around, or some things that might need to happen that youth music can support you with, then please do approach us. What we can't really offer is additional money, but we can be really flexible about moving money around, even if you've kind of said, right, we're going to deliver X number of outputs and work with X number of children and young people. And actually what you really, really need is, some core funding to cover operational costs, or, some support for you as a leader to kind of see you through turbulent times. Please just ask. And because I've got my Northeast colleagues on the line here, there's a brilliant expression up north that we say, shy bairns getting out. So if you don't ask, you don't get. So, and I would hope and I'm confident that if you do approach a member of the grants team, your grants manager, that they'll treat you with respect and compassion, and they'll be there to support you and to have your back.
Iona, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, thank you. I did that thing where I lost the thing, and now I don't know if this is going to work. Yes, great. So just a few final reflections from me on a really practical note. So I think what we heard from Claire and Peter was some really amazing leadership, and I guess that's what makes our work at the Decelerator doable. Most people are like, how do you do your work? It's not the most depressing job in the world. And as you just heard from Claire and Peter, although it's not easy, once you start sort of opening yourself up to what could be possible through organizational endings, they can bring a lot of value and meaning and purpose. And I say that very carefully because I want to be very clear that this is a time of light and dark. There are things that are already being lost from communities and civil society that we can't just sort of wish away with some nice planning and some supportive funding. The Decelerator is a space for us to acknowledge that, and we'll never ever rush to good endings at the expense of us really noticing and being aware of what might be being lost in an organizational ending. And there are still better and worse ways of leading through this time. And as we just heard from Claire and Peter, legacies can unfold in amazing, powerful ways that might have challenged your original sense of what your organization was for and what success and lasting impact might look like. But it doesn't mean that it's not valuable. And so thinking about what we heard from Claire and Peter, I guess in this time of what we see as great uncertainty and upheaval, the most impactful thing that any organization can do is to not just say, okay, we're packing up, we're shrinking, we're off, but more just with the kind of foresight and clarity and vision that Claire and Peter demonstrated, put a full range of structural options on the table. So Claire said, perhaps this is actually about leadership succession, but if it's not, perhaps it's about shrinking, or perhaps it's about moving some of our assets to safer homes whilst we wind down this particular organization. And that is really the simple challenge the Decelerator exists to support the sector with, is to not be bumped by crisis into a decision that you've not fully considered, and that might not be the best possible option of a set of maybe suboptimal options that you have ahead of you. And I'll just acknowledge here that Claire and Peter did that from an extraordinarily personal crisis, with Claire's diagnosis, or Claire's prognosis, I guess, don't know how you would describe it. It would be very understandable that you flip right into sort of anything from the Eeyore to the rescuer, but you sort of took a great big deep breath, you pulled on the resources of the trustees that you could convene around you, and you took time to really consider all your options. And honestly, it gives me goosebumps just even replaying what I think we just heard from Claire and Peter. And that is all, I guess, the Decelerator exists to support the sector with at this very difficult time. And when people are like, but what options? Like, there are all sorts of different ways that just, like, we hear ending and we just assume closure, but we're talking about kind of collaboration. I'm supporting a network of community centres in Exeter right now to co-house some of their assets. So they have one legal structure at a community centre, but multiple outposts rather than 10 different charities. And that's kind of a kind of merger come sustained collaboration that tries to condense some of the challenges of running an organisation and maximise the footprint locally. We can also talk about mergers, we can talk about asset transfer, which we heard a bit of from Peter and Claire. You can refocus and narrow to what really matters, and you can also think about a deliberate ending. And those are just some of the options that the Decelerator hotline is just ready to help any organisation who comes to us think about all possible options, including those. And those are always held alongside, like, yes, if after 0 of your applications in the last year being successful, if the 5 remaining ones come off or 2 of them come off, that might well be your bridge forwards. So this is never at the expense of like a hope for survival, but it's not magical thinking, which is just like, oh, well, we just hope that this stuff against the odds is going to come off and save us. And so, as you heard from Peter and Claire, they mapped what they sort of depended on and what that was valuable about their organisation. The founding leaders, the venue, a funder, critical staff, community trust, energy prices. There's so much that what you depend on. There's so much in what you depend on and what is valuable in your organisation. And thinking about those, not just thinking about, you know, a really reductive, like, set of funders or another way of viewing your organization's assets is really critical if you're to think about all possible options for your organization. And I guess like one of our kind of pleas to the sector is to both plan for endings and transitions, not just continuity. And so in many funding applications to this day, you still have to justify how your work will be sustainable beyond the end of the lifetime of that particular funding thing. And we see that as a very well-intentioned but not particularly helpful assumption that everything can last forever, even if you're not going to fund it anymore. And that's not to point the finger at those funders, we're all at it, but like what would it look like for that question to say, if funding continues, how will this work continue? If it doesn't continue, how will you secure a legacy? And what would that do to just shift the way we see organizations and their impact? And when we say plan for endings, we don't mean like plan for the worst. We mean like if a few of your dependencies really fall away, what is the thing that you'd protect? I'm working with a community newspaper, and they're talking about basically their 4 physical newspapers a year being the most important thing they do, and they could deliver it on a shoestring budget, and they dump their digital activity, they dump their physical newsroom, but that's what's most important to them. And having had that conversation a year out from their financial cliff edge, they're kind of scenario planning how they're going to get to the point, if they need to, where they protect that rather than protect the scale of their organisation or everything all at once. Just make space for feelings. Claire and Peter did this in abundance. Like at a decision-making table, whether it's a trustee group or a team level or an SLT, if you have an SLT, or with a group of volunteers, if they're the people that manage delivery, there will be so many things going on underneath the surface as soon as it becomes clear or becomes clearer that an ending might be on the table. And making space for what it is that people are thinking really helps people feel a bit steadier, and then they take better decisions. And around the table, there'll be worry for jobs if there are jobs in the offing or at risk. There'll be concern for communities and beneficiaries. There might be fear about people's own reputation. There'll be despair at the state of the world. And this might only be a small project, but the state of the world is awful. And if I can't protect this small project, I've given up completely. And then there's like fury with funders. Gosh, some people are so furious funders, and yes, I can feel fury too, but like that can become completely overwhelming, along with there's very real sense of palpable relief sometimes that people are like, well, I've done a really good job at keeping this show on the road for a decade, but if this is the end, then I'm actually, a part of me is just like, thank goodness for that, as well as being concerned about jobs, as well as being concerned about the impact on communities. Like, it's not come at a no personal cost to people to keep this stuff on the road. And so we really do make space for that relief, as well as just people feeling ambivalent because they're just done. And this is a penultimate point, anticipating things early is everything. Like, we we don't think the Decelerator hotline is what everyone needs. It might just be that like coming to this presentation gives you the excuse to raise this at your next trustee meeting, and you can say, I went to this interesting thing the other day and they asked me this question and I wondered if we should answer this question together, and then we should revisit it every 6 to 12 months just to make sure that we don't trip ourselves into something that we later think was a bit, we could have had a bit more foresight over. And so organisations that consider endings earlier than necessary have more options if the time comes for them to actually act on those endings that could be rooted in legacy, care and agency. And so I guess, like, as I say, the Decelerator is free at the point of use, it's totally confidential, and 100% of people who've used us say that they'd use us again, but you don't have to trust us. If you feel like you've got a mentor or a coach or a trustee member, you should be taking this stuff to them. You don't have to come to us, but we do run this free confidential hotline, and all it takes is you to fill out a really quick form, and my wonderful colleagues Zoe and Holly will be in touch with you as soon as possible. We do have a load of tools and guides on our website, which wonderfully Claire and Peter had used in the process of planning their ending without even knowing they were ours, because a trustee of theirs found them. And so we'll make sure that we share a few of the key ones with you in the follow-up email today. And ultimately, we can also signpost you to like referral partners and trusted places for you to get more support. Like, we don't do consultancy, we just do free guidance and support and coaching. But we have so many amazing people who can give you anything from a day to like 5 weeks of like dedicated support with a wind down. And some of that can be pro bono and some of it can be paid. And we would encourage all of you to heed what Claire and Peter said, which is to be a bit bold with your funders. Like, you know, and if they turn around and they start doing terrible things like clawing back funding that you think could legitimately be used for a better ending, tell us and we'll go and make a stink with them. We have helped organisations make the case for better endings where they were told by their funders that there was absolutely no room for it, and they were able to be successful in the end. So like, don't hold back from your funders, and also really lean into the brilliant leadership of youth music today. So I think that's everything. I'm going to stop sharing and then we've got some time for some questions. Sorry, I went on a bit long there. It's 12:05. Phoebe, do you want to host questions or shall I? I don't mind.
Up to you. You can if you want. If anyone wants to just ask away.
It can be a bit weird for people to ask these things because sometimes people are like, well, I don't know if that's the right time to put it on the ending, and you don't want to do it in front of other people. So sometimes it can be like tumbleweed at this point, which is totally fine. Don't feel the need to ask a question. But if anyone does have any questions or even just a reflection, we'd welcome hearing them. So
I have a question, if that's okay. Sorry, I don't have my camera.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, my name's Namaiwa. I run a CIC called Girl Grind UK. And we're based in the West Midlands, and we've been funded by Youth Music for the past few years, delivering a range of different projects. And I guess last year I kind of looked at Girl Grind as a business and looked at the way we kind of raise investment, which is largely through grant funding, and could see the endings of like multi-year funding pots that were all sequenced to happen like kind of one after the other. And that made us like sit back and think about closing the organisation. And that was like a real thing for a few months in my thoughts. And now we've kind of got to a point where it's not about the closure, it's about transitioning to a different legal structure that kind of lets us have better revenue streams. So I guess like I found it really interesting to hear everything on the call that I was able to catch. But my thoughts and I guess observations are just more about what are there examples of those processes happening, and like what does that look like? Because it's clear to us that we don't want to end, but it's the way we've taken on consultancy already around what type of charity if we was to transition into that, or like we have a few options. But yeah, I guess like what does the detransition of one look like into another? Yeah.
Great question. And there are definitely people who are coming to us about that. There's a lot of talk about that specifically we're seeing in the refugee and migration sector right now, for all sorts of reasons, about trying to navigate a kind of changing political context in relationship to their work, and how might they shift their legal structure to fortify them against like sort of challenges to their legitimacy or license to operate. And then there are others who are choosing to let go of charity structures, let's say in the arts and culture sector, but frankly any sector, because what they're interested in doing is trying to liberate some of their capacity. Because if you can see ways of like not relying on grant funding that requires you to be a charity, then you can save significant leadership hassle and admin every year. Don't let the Charity Commission hear me tell you this. But people are trying to extricate themselves from charity structures, because if it's really not helping your business model and the way that you're earning money, then you can save time, energy in other ways. So I don't know if any of that is relevant to your situation. There are, I can make sure to share them after this. There are some really helpful guides that you might have found already that like help you game out like what kind of structure might be useful. And we know some lawyers who often give organisations free, like 20 or 30 minutes to just talk through on a call with a lawyer what their options might be. And that can be signposted to from our hotline. So you could have a call if you were, it sounds like you're quite far down the line and you've done it really well on your own, so you don't need us. But if you were earlier on in this, having a call with us and then finding your way to a lawyer, for example, is one way of doing it. I guess basically, I think there's a lot of that going on, and there'll be a lot more of it going on. So it's definitely a part of what I think civil society can expect in the years ahead.
It feels quite like you need to get it right the first time. Like it's not, you can only kind of do that once. So I think taking our time and being really pedantic about everything and me losing my mind and going back and forth with it all and I don't want to do any of it anymore, let's just go back to whatever we were doing, is part of it. Because it feels like you need to get that right whenever you decide to change.
And I'd it sounds really obvious, but I'd commend you for having taken time to look at the context you're operating in and what your delivery staff and funding staff, if you have them, were telling you in terms of what the context was, and then putting those questions, those bigger existential questions on the table early enough. Because as you just said, you need to be a bit pedantic. If you're going to shift your constitution, if you're going to change the way your organization is owned or governed, doing that from a point of crisis where you're we're doing this because maybe in the next 2 or 3 months we can earn a bit more income from an income source that's right now very small but could be bigger if we shifted our structure. That in our experience is not the way to secure success. I'll just name that you did a really amazing thing in giving yourself time by putting those questions on the table early enough. I also want to say that Claire, Tony asked a question, and I wonder what do you think in this question about Tony, if you don't mind talking from Tony?
That's what I was going to refer to. I think the last question was very important, but I think Tony's question is critical. I think it's really important that we actually understand that we can sometimes feel very isolated as an organisation or as a charity. And I don't think we are sometimes brave enough to be able to share this story of how we're feeling with others. And I have had experience where I felt one network I thought would be really understanding, and actually it wasn't. I think there's almost this feeling of, and I think it's because people are up against it. People are also a bit frightened when you explain. I've seen people just absolutely blank out when they hear I've got a brain tumour. They can't deal with it at all. And that was quite debilitating, if I'm honest. Maybe women, which is quite interesting. I think you're right that we need to be a lot more joined up as a sector, so particularly the youth music is a great example of where the 3 leaders of the organisations we worked with were actually a lot more supportive. And I think it's because we've built those relationships. I think it's very important for us to actually say, I'm struggling, I'm finding this difficult. And that's certainly what's happened with our youth music partners. I think because we've had a sort of relationship of the ups and downs over the years of when we've got funding, when we've not got funding, when our young people have had crises, I think that's demonstrated trust. And I think we should be working much more to build on trust in the sector. And I think your question's really important. We shouldn't, as human beings, be afraid of our vulnerability. That's why I didn't want ours to come across as, oh, look, I've got a tumour, but hey, we're going to have a big party. We haven't shared and had time to share the darkness of the fear, the upset. But what we have shared is when you do actually have an opportunity to have somebody like a brilliant chair, like we've had, who did regular catch-ups, a brilliant board, brilliant partners, where you do know that that can happen, it does make a difference. So, Tony, I really think it's important to acknowledge your question, and I do hope you find, and anybody finds, the right allies in your journey that will really help.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, Colin, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Claire and Peter for sharing that story because I'm 5 years post-stroke survivor and sort of in the middle of funding, delivering youth music funding. So it's really important, and you know, the loneliness and the battle and the desire to bounce back and the responsibility of something that we're so passionate about sharing with Youth Music's help, understanding, access fund for applications, etc., etc. We've just finished delivering 2 years across Dorset in family hubs with babies 0 to 12 months. Some of the most powerful work I've been involved in, and I've been able to steer the ship and carry on delivering, but we've also developed as an organisation from sort of reach of about 94 to 335 over the last 2 years. But, you know, it's still on my shoulder about legacy and continuation and getting younger leaders involved so that the work that everyone wants and everyone loves can continue. But the pressure and I won't say loneliness, but you know, another co-director has been busy home educating her autistic selective mute daughter, and so time has been really, really minimal, you know, to support. So thank you for sharing, because that's burst my bubble of having to just live with a life-changing condition, really.
Thanks, Colin. I'm aware we're at time now. So the only thing I'll say is the majority of people find out about the Decelerator through word of mouth, because a lot of this stuff travels in like WhatsApp groups and things. So put us in your pocket, and next time someone says, oh, geez, crazy, this is intense, I don't know what my options are, say, I know just the people. And if you wanted to, posting on social media or anywhere is very helpful, because as I say, most people find us through word of mouth. Phoebe, is there any final reflections from you?
I think that's it. Clearly we needed a bit more time. It's always a nice discussion to have, but just thank you so much for your vulnerability, guys, and for sharing everything. And it's been really lovely. I don't know if Carol, you've got anything else to sort of mention at the end, but I will send the recording round, etc.
No, just thanks for coming, everyone. It's been lovely to see you, and I think we've had a really rich and important conversation.
Thanks, Youth Music, for convening it.
Thanks for steering us through, and to Claire and Peter for your inspiration.
We can help in any way, just practically get in touch with us. We'll put our contact details. We can also just be there as a sounding board or a free conversation, not in the way that the practical support from Iona and Deceleration, but just on a human level as people who've been through it. We'd be very happy to help.
Thank you.